So, I'm a geneticist. So what on earth am I doing researching paleoanthropology and the bones of hominin man? It's kind of a long story, but the bottom line is our genetic arguments are very, very strong that you can't get ape to man evolution. But people have told me, they said, well, regardless of your theoretical studies and what the genetics seems to say, we know you're wrong because the fossils prove a continuous progression from ape-like creature to man. And so we realized we needed to examine that evidence. And the hominin bones haven't been critically evaluated since about 1992. 1992 was when Marvin Lubenow wrote his, what was then comprehensive and updated version of a creationist perspective on the hominin bones. But the major fossil evidences have been found since then. And so he did an update, I think, in 2004, but there's really not been a comprehensive analysis of the hominin bones for a very long time. And there's new things happening, new understandings. And so Chris Rube, who is my colleague and friend, and I started to do work on this 5 years ago. And it was so interesting to study it because what we discovered was the evidence against the hominin fossils is very strong. And so I'd like to present that evidence to you. You can find out more about contested bones at this website. And I'm just going to pull something out here. Here we have a study, a survey, showing what people think are the biggest evidences for evolution. And so here are the things: human evolution, evolutionary theory, fossils, science in general, progression of civilization, DNA, Big Bang, dinosaurs, deep time, and other things. So the thing is that human evolution is the biggest concern. This is the big stumbling block. So if we win every other argument and lose on that point, we lose everything, because who cares where fruit flies came from? The issue is, where did we come from? So human evolution is huge, and it turns out evolutionary theory bears on that. The genetic entropy clearly has bearing on this, but also, and just the general, it turns out that most of the things that are claimed to be fossil evidence for evolution is systematically collapsing. So Tiktaalik, we can show, is not what they think it is. The wolf to whale evolutionary story doesn't hold up to examination. But this is what we're going to talk about right now, and it's clearly a pivotal issue. Okay, I'm going to present 7 major problems with the ape-to-man story. And this is only, obviously, a short synopsis of the book. But the first point is there's a complete collapse of the traditional understanding of ape-to-man evolution. What we see in the textbooks, what we've been taught over the decades, is now come undone. The field as a whole say that the standard picture, the ape parade, is false. So here we have this progression. Everything, if this is too big, but if this was a chimpanzee and this is a human, then these intermediates is what we call hominins. Hominid would apply to all of them. Hominin would be the missing links. And so we're talking about hominins. I just want to get that vocabulary straight. And so this was taught for most of the last century as dogmatically is that, let's say, this changed to this and then this died. So this was replaced by this, was replaced by this. And so there's a progression, a linear progression. And they expected as more fossil evidence accumulated, that linear progression would be, more and more clear. And so the whole field has rejected that progression, which is fascinating to consider. And so I'm just going to quickly go through some quotes. Okay, here's, about 10% of our book is in blue. It's quotes from leading paleoanthropologists. So we draw very heavily on what paleoanthropologists are saying and writing, and because all of what they're saying affirms what we're saying. It's just, we're just surprised at what's happening in the field. And you'll notice that most of these papers are like Nature, Science, National Proceedings, these are the top journals. This evolutionist says, the once popular fresco showing a single file of marching hominids becoming ever more vertical, tall, and hairless now appears to be a fiction. And here's another prominent person. There are a popular image of human evolution that you'll find all over the place. On the left is the picture of an ape, on the right is a man, between the two is a succession of figures that become ever more human. Our progress from ape to human looks so smooth and so tidy, such a beguiling image that even the experts are loath to let it go, but it is an illusion. It's pretty strong, isn't it? A little more. Human fossil discoveries that are repeatedly punched holes in the naive idea that our evolution would be a clean, clear, straight. The straight line has blossomed into a spreading, rather uncontrolled bush, and we don't like it. We want our history to be nice and neat, but the fossils keep messing us up. We want the last 200,000 years of human evolution, the time when modern man appeared, to make some sense, but it doesn't. It doesn't make sense. That's what they're saying. They can't actually find a trail that goes from ape to man. It's really striking. So they replaced it with a messy bush, and this is again a very prominent scientist who published this drawing. Here's the tree, human tree of life, and here are these different fossils, and the colors have to do with when they think the timing, who lived when. But you'll notice all the branches are broken. They actually can't connect any parts of the, so these branches are not levitating, they're just showing that they're not connected. No way to connect the branches. And here's a quote, if you want to be objective, we should almost certainly scrap the iconic list of names. All these species names. Said just scrap them all, and we'll start from scratch. And we'll hypothesize about morphs and building testable theories. You see, science is building testable theories. Speculations don't count, because you can't test speculations. And we have to completely rethink genera and species. Does this sound like it's clear as any fool can see this is true? People in the field are really, really in a state of disarray. Even with all the fossil evidence and analytical techniques from the past 50 years, a convincing hypothesis for the origin of Homo, that means man, remains elusive. And here's a famous paleoanthropologist and his co-authors. He writes in this paper, the Pliocene hominid diversity conundrum. Do more fossils mean less clarity? And the answer is yes. The more fossils we found, the more confused we are. We can't make any sense of the fossil record. So maybe the problem is that there isn't a transition from ape to man. Maybe that's why they can't make sense of it. All new discoveries make things more confusing. Okay. The transition to Homo continues to be almost totally confusing. Donald Johanson, top people in the field. What a mess early Homo is. Another top leader. So basically everything we've learned, they are saying we have to just start from scratch. We don't know what the heck's going on with the data. How come the popular press isn't communicating that? How come the textbooks don't reflect that? It's because there's an ideological agenda. So most people think this is overwhelming evidence, and they'll tell you or I, boy, you're so stupid. I just read an article that shows this clear progression. Turns out that within this body of bones and bone fragments they find are two groups, ape and human. Not a progression, but two distinct groups. And so here's another author. She says, no doubt about it, Australopithecines are like apes, and Homo group are like humans. Australopiths are an extinct type of ape, and Homo has been Homo all along. So just to try to create a little clarity here, in the world of taxonomy, as they're naming bones, there are splitters and there are lumpers. And so I want you to know what splitters and lumpers mean. So splitters are people who would take something like dogs, and if they found dogs just like in bones, they would categorize the dog kind into hundreds of different species. So obviously Chihuahua bones and Great Dane bones, they say these are two very different species, maybe different genera, especially if the bones were just fragments of bones. So the splitters would split hairs. They always want, every time they find a new fossil, they say, a new species. Because you see, you get a reputation and publications and maybe fame and fortune by finding new species. You don't get any credit for finding another version of an old species. So there's this motivation to find, it's like a treasure hunt mode. Every new species is, every new bone is a new species. So they've broken up the Australopith kind. Now, Australopithecus means southern ape. It's Latin for southern ape. It's well named because this is an ape, and it lives in the southern hemisphere. So it's well named, and they've split up into Australopithecus africanus, Australopithecus afarensis, Ramidus, habilis. Actually, habilis is sometimes put in the Homo group. But basically, if you're a splitter, you'd say all the species are different. A lumper says they're all Australopiths. Let's call them one species. And so over here we have the different Homo types, like Homo floresiensis, that's Hobbit man, or Homo erectus, or Homo naledi, that's the newest find, or Homo neanderthalensis. And the splitters would say, oh, these are totally different. Actually, lumpers are more rational. They realize that there's lots of diversity within a kind, but they're all Homo sapiens. There are many paleoanthropologists who would say all these things are human, and we strongly agree with that. So the way you can get ape-men is you can either have human bones mixed in with this group. You know, if you have a jaw from an ape and a skull from a man, you can say, oh, looks like an ape-man, because there has some ape-like features and skull and human features. So that's the famous Piltdown man. That was actually a very famous find. They eventually found it was a deliberate fraud. And so you can, mixed bones is the best explanation for a group of bones that we're going to be looking at. The other one is that on the Homo side, and on the human side, is we see populations that are degenerating. We mentioned a little bit about that earlier today. So these evidences, people say there's so much evidence. Well, if you count every bone fragment, I guess there's a lot of evidence. But the actual total amount of actual skeletons is incredibly small. So let's take a look here. Okay, in Neanderthal there are many skeletons and a lot of those skeletons are approaching complete skeletons. That one, everyone agrees, is human. But Homo erectus, which is considered an important missing link, they only have one complete skeleton after all these years. They've been studying Homo erectus for like 100 years. And there's only one complete skeleton to look at. Hobbit, one skeleton plus a few extra bones. Homo habilis, 0 skeletons, but they gave it a name. Sedaba, a composite of 2 different individuals to give one partial partially complete skeleton. Naledi, the most recent one, 2 scattered composite skeletons. I think maybe 16 individuals had contributed bones, but they were at best could only assemble something that looked, it was just a blend of bones. But only 2 even partially complete skeletons. And for Lucy's kind, there's only 1 relatively complete skeleton. Lucy's kind, and same thing for Artie. So incredibly little evidence. Now, when they found the complete skeleton of Homo erectus, they had before only had like skull caps and pieces of the skull, and so they were so sure it was going to be very apish. When they actually finally found a complete, it was clearly a human anatomy. It has some unusual skull features, but as soon as they found a complete skeleton, they stopped thinking of it as an intermediate and saw it was human. Okay, going back, this is the most complete skeleton for what's called Homo habilis. And those bones were covered over a broad range. There's no reason to assume they're all human, certainly not all from the same individual. This is called now a wastebasket taxon. It's just where you throw loose bones. You find a loose bone, throw it into the category Homo habilis. So there are several major hominin types that have been celebrated as like missing links, and in these cases they're clearly a blend of human bones and ape bones. So it's widely recognized that Homo habilis, which was considered a key missing link for many decades, is as a mixture of ape and human bones. Australopithecus afarensis is Lucy's kind. It's clear that group is a mixture of human and ape bones, and then Australopithecus sediba is clearly a chimeric species, as is recognized by people in the field. Yes?
Are you familiar with these giant skeletons that have been found in these mounds?
No, but I'm skeptical. You can show me evidence, but I don't believe it until you show me evidence.
7 feet tall skeletons.
Oh, 7 feet tall is credible.
Yeah, 7 to 8 feet tall skeletons
Ah.
that have been unearthed from mounds.
Show me the paper. I'd love to look at it.
John, another quick question.
Yeah.
When you say bones, are they fossils? Is this only bones? Is there any DNA analysis, or this is just?
They're all bones. They're all bones. They call them fossils, but they are bones. If you look hard enough, they found the DNA from Neanderthal and from Denisovan, but I think I would love to see the DNA analysis for Lucy and the others.
So none of these other ones, there's no DNA at all?
There's nothing published. I don't understand why they haven't done that. So these are bones. They often smell of death. They have that. They stink of death.
They're decaying.
So they're still in the process of decay. So we're going to just look at one of them, Sediba, a very famous find. Sediba was found in a pit, and it was in the pit. They found thousands of bones of all different zebras, antelope, monkeys, ape-like creatures, and so you wonder how that pit got filled with bones. At any rate, this is a paleoanthropologist's son. Actually, was the first one to find evidence for bones in that pit. And this is the famous Sediba skeleton. And these are all the bones they found. The gray is pretend. That's just like artistic license. But basically, there's bones here that look very human, and bones here that look like the hips look very human, the legs look very human. The hands are not, well, actually, I have to think about that. But basically, more of a Homo erectus type skull. Actually, the hands are very human. Well, guess what? That famous, this is the second most recent discovery. So this was just a few years back. A a number of paleoanthropologists are now saying it's a mixture of ape bones and human bones. And so the parts that look really ape-like, they look ape-like because they're from an ape, and the parts that look really human are human-like because they're from a man. And what we're going to see is these bone beds where you have just a pile of different bones. We don't know exactly what creates the piles of bones, but it potentially, like that pit could have been used to throw your bones in as a type of garbage pit. And so it's now widely acknowledged that Sedaba is not a missing link. It is a blend of human and ape bones. It seems strange to think that there would be homo bones, human bones and ape bones, specifically Australopith bones, because one is supposed to be the ancestor and one is supposed to be the descendant. They should be not in the same graveyard or grave bone pit. But it turns out that Australopith and man coexisted extensively. And it looks like these tribes were hunting and gathering tribes. And so they were collecting, they were eating meat, and apes would have been on the menu. And so that's a good explanation of why there would be ape and human bones in the same locations. This is an early kind of idea of the overlap. Here's time, millions of years. But let's not consider the time isn't point, it's relative time. You find Australopith and man living together, and you find human tools going way back here, all the way to the beginning of the Australopith, earliest existence of Australopiths. And then the Australopiths went extinct, and man continued, obviously. That's been updated. The new evidence shows human fossils and footprints that go way actually beyond the apes. So instead of having the apes precede, so here's your time frame. And so this is the present and this is the distant past. And what we see is that actually man is, in human history goes back, they coexisted, apes and humans, which is very biblical. Basically, it's all post-flood. And so these are tools, and they go deep into the record as well. These locations, there are 3 major places in Africa where they find mixed bones. In all cases, they find thousands of butchered bones, lots of stone tools, human footprints and human bones, windbreak shelters, communal centers, living sites, and they find mixtures of human and Australopith bones in the same locations. So it's not precursor versus ancestor, it's like hunter and prey. This is regarding the famous Lucy discoveries and related species. Johansen himself, he's the founder of Lucy, originally reported in his paper in Science that the collection of Homo and Australopithecus coexisted as early as 3 million years ago. So they're saying that they're finding human bones and Australopith bones in the same burial sites and that they coexisted. And so that was, not Johansen, and the other really famous person at that time was Leakey. Right. So Mary Leakey and Johansen, both at 2 independent parts of Africa, reached the same conclusion, and then that is that humans and Australopithecus coexisted, and Australopithecus was on the menu, basically.
That's 3 to 4 million years ago.
It depends on who's counting.
Okay.
And they reported that in 1976. It just hasn't really been.
So that was swept conveniently under the rug because Leakey changed his story and changed Mary's story without her permission. He reassigned not his bones and her bones all to Australopiths. And we have a whole chapter dedicated to that story. It's really an interesting story, what went on there, but it changed the field and how people looked at everything. Here's Richard Leakey saying, "I see no reason that bands of Homo would not have killed and eaten robust Australopithecines when they could, just as they killed and ate antelopes and their other prey animals. Turkana material seems to confirm the view developed as a result of the work at Alduve. The Homo and Australopithecus are two quite separate and distinct early Pleistocene hominids. Here's actually, you've noticed I'm numbering these. We're on 6, so we're almost done. Human evolution, take all dates with a large dose of salt. So you're asking about dating methods. So there are different dating methods that yield different dates. In other words, you can take the same bone or the rock surrounding that bone, and depending on which dating method you use, you'll get very different dates. So that should be an immediate warning that these dating methods are not reliable. Number 2, they're highly selective on what data they use. We document that in the book. Where they have a lot of dates, they decide this one fits our model best. They throw out the others. Selective use of dating is extensively used. And then lastly, classical dating methods. Turns out when you use them on young rocks, they give old dates. That immediately tells you there's a problem with their dating methods. Because if rocks we know are young are giving radioactive dates of that are old, then obviously these dating methods aren't reliable. So a good example would be Mount St. Helens, 1980. We know exactly when it erupted. We know exactly when the lava dome developed. It's right there. And that newly formed lava should have a date of a few decades, max. So actual dating using potassium argon, which was there's not many people using potassium argon now, but all of the timeline, all the framework, all the things that they use as their benchmarks were potassium argon dated. So it's exactly the same method used, for example, with the Alduve samples of mixtures of Homo and man. So in this case, they're way off, aren't they? So what are there other examples of that? Well, Andrew Snelling has compiled from many different research papers from showing the location of different volcanic material and when it extruded. So example, here we go at Mount Stromboli, actually erupted 38 years ago, but it dated at 2.4 million years. So that eruption matches the same date you would put for some of the early Australopiths. And so just look at the numbers. Basically, very young dates, but the measured or radioisometric dates go up to 30 million, between 2 million, 12 million. All these dates are, so clearly that particular dating method has a problem. We could talk about the problem, but it just tells you something. You should be skeptical of dating methods. This is the last point I want to emphasize, and that is that the genetics, there's strong genetic evidence of genetic entropy in the fossil record. And so we know that evolution is going the wrong way, number one, because of mutational degradation, in not only in human populations, but we see mutational degradation in cheetahs, and eastern mountain gorillas. We see it in the H1N1 virus, like we spoke about this morning, and we see it in E. coli, in bacterial populations. There is an accumulation, a continuous accumulation of bad mutations in all these systems. So number one, you can't have ape-to-man evolution because there's no way to actually, things should go extinct in that amount of time, and because of the waiting time, you can't build the information you need to change an ape into a human. So it doesn't work genetically, and there's evidence for this in the fossil record. We can make a very strong case that most Homo variants, which would be Homo erectus, Neanderthal, Naledi, show evidence of inbreeding, high mutation load, and reductive evolution. This morning we talked about evolution where you might have something that's beneficial in the sense of sort of better survival, but it's a loss of genes. We're going to see there's evidence of genetic degeneration that is adaptive for some populations, but it's in the long run has to do with loss of functions. So these are Neanderthal, erectus, Hobbit, and Naledi all seem to be degenerating, and their bones show it. So here's this recent paper showing Neanderthals so they can sequence the genomes of Neanderthals, and they compared them to us, and they said Neanderthals had a lot more mutations. They had about 40% lower fitness, and they were heavily inbred. So basically, Neanderthals were humans that were genetically degenerating. Why should they be degenerating? It's because they lived in isolated tribes, and there was close intermating within families, and so the genetic damage mutations would be accumulated faster, and they would be exposed. That is, the inbreeding would bring the mutations to the surface. Here's a paper that just came out a few months ago. In fact, we found it just a week ago. An abundance of developmental anomalies and abnormalities in Pleistocene people. So they're talking about the time frame when Neanderthal, Naledi, Erectus were all living. 75 documented anomalies were seen in 66 individuals. They looked at 66 ancient skeletons, and they all showed genetic anomalies. More anomalies than people. Some of them have multiple genetic anomalies. This is Neanderthal skeleton, and this is the way the artist originally portrayed Neanderthal as an ape-man. This is the first of the hominin fossils. This goes back into the 1800s. Now we have full skeletons, and we see that they are clearly anatomically modern. Slight differences in the skull shape, but they had musical instruments, art, and the figure here this is a person who was buried with very valuable jewelry, and who clearly, which burial and jewelry and art and music should tell us that these are fully human people. And indeed, genetics confirms that. Here's a person, a modern person with a little bit of Neanderthal blood. And so they show the prominent brow ridge. This person was not only a famous boxer, but also a member of parliament in Russia. Very intelligent man. Has nothing to do with skull shape. We now know that Neanderthal were interbreeding with humans, and we've changed the way we see Neanderthal from a brutish thing to a very human thing. And what's happening here is there's some reductive evolution. Actually, I'm going to hold that image in your mind, and I'm going to go to the next topic and to make more sense there. Okay, this is the first bones for Homo erectus. So Homo erectus has almost exactly the same anatomy as Homo neanderthal, but they have a smaller brain volume, and they tend to be small people. And so you'll notice that this is the famous Java man skeleton, which again was found around 1900. You see this right here? There's anomalies in this part of the femur. That's a pathology. Something is wrong with this individual. You have an unusual skull shape like Neanderthal with a prominent brow ridge, but the brain volume is less. So here's some more skulls from Homo erectus, and this is about their collect. I didn't pick and choose these. These are the best skulls they could find of Homo erectus. It's kind of disturbing because it looks like something out of a nightmare. These are all really messed up human beings with terrible pathologies. And so, and they show extreme abnormalities and deformities. And so this is better understood not as pre-humans, but as humans that have undergone accelerated degeneration, accelerated genetic degeneration. And so this is the reductive part of it. So it turns out that the brain is the most energy costly organ. Like the brain takes up 2% of our body weight, but it counts for 20% of our energy use. So if you have a group of people who live on some remote island or some remote place in the jungle where they're totally isolated and they're in small tribes, then there's going to be chronic starvation conditions. And so when a species is exposed for a long time to chronic starvation, there's selection for smaller body size and smaller brain volume. And this has been documented in human populations and other animals show it. It's sometimes called island dwarfism because especially on islands you see this happening. But it would happen wherever there's small isolated tribes and there's not enough food. There's selection for smaller people, less brain. Is this adaptive? Yes. Is it evolution? No, it's de-evolution. It's going the wrong way. But it does help adaptation. There's a short-term benefit. And so the population, as it's struggling to survive, resorts to, not that they choose, but by necessity, only the small survive. And actually, there's actually a benefit to having a smaller brain. Because in that situation, it's not whether you can do calculus or not, it's whether you can get enough energy to sustain yourself. So this is really clear, and actually the paleoanthropologists are agreeing with us. We came to this conclusion a few years ago, but more and more there's paleoanthropologists are saying we're seeing a lot of pathology and a lot of reductive evolution in these populations. So here's the island where this is the cave where they found the bones of what's called hobbit man. And so hobbit man is tiny, like 3.5 feet tall, but fully adult, and it has numerous facial and dental abnormalities. And the brain, not only are they tiny people, but the brain is disproportionately reduced in size. Not just smaller because the individual is smaller, but because the brain is reduced. So this is clearly a case of reductive evolution. Initially they wanted to call it something pre-human, but both the dating methods and the evidence indicates that these are humans that were suffering from this chronic condition of island dwarfism. And so it's a human, but really diseased. Yes?
Before you use the number of 200 generations, how many generations does something like this take for a small population?
If you have really close inbreeding, I think like brother and sister for 6 generations, you'd probably see really severe. But in a population of, let's say, 10 or 20 or 30, it would take maybe 10 or 20. But this would happen very quickly. There's no such, that intense type of inbreeding isn't happening today. All those people groups have disappeared. It's a fatal, unless there's an infusion of new genes into the population, it wouldn't take that long for this degeneration to happen. This is forensic reanalysis based upon the skull. They basically put flesh on the skull. It's clearly, a hobbit man is not a pre-human. Hobbit is clearly a diseased human. But the same process of reductive evolution happens in rhinoceroses and elephants and anywhere where you take an animal, put it on an island where there's no predators and almost no food, you see this happen. So it's not unique to man, and it's clearly a biological reality. And so again, hobbit man clearly was the example of this reductive evolution. Naledi is the most recent and most famous find, and for a while they were calling it almost human. And here are the bones. And so some people have argued that this isn't human, it's pre-human or less, an ape even, some people have argued. But it's clearly not the case. Here's an example. Here's hobbit man on this side, and here's Naledi. They're both about 3.5 feet tall. They both show dramatically reduced brain volume. They both show other pathologies, but they're clearly human. And so we know that Naledi is human because the Naledi buried their dead. Or actually, this is contestable, But here's the cave system where Naledi skeletons were found. It's very hard to get to. Utter darkness here. You have to climb up and go down this little chute, and that's where the bones were found. This isn't necessarily deliberate burial, but the founders, people who discovered this, are saying this is deliberate burial. And turns out when they take an endocast, see if you have a skull, the skull, the shape of the inside of that skull, that chamber, tells you exactly what the shape of the brain was. So you can actually, by looking at the inside of the skull, you can tell if it was a human brain or an ape brain. They have different shape and form. So the endocasts show it's clearly human. The jaws on the left are clearly human. The ape is on the right. The hands are clearly human. Feet are clearly human. And the pelvis, people have made a big thing about the exact angle of those kind of wings that you see, what that angle is. But it's called a flared hip. That's not a diagnostic of ape, it's diagnostic of many humans, including erectus, hobbit, and modern man. So it's human. And within the field, the people would say, like Stringer's a very famous paleoanthropologist, overall, to my eye, the material looks like most similar to small-bodied examples of Homo erectus. And here's another science writer talking, quoting Tim White. The Homo naledi cranium is similar in conformation and size to the earliest and most primitive Homo erectus. So they're saying this is not an ape creature, this is a human creature. They would say a pre-human, but the evidence is against it. A lot of people have made too big a deal about size or certain anatomies. The truth is the human population has incredible diversity. So here's the shortest man in the world, and this is the tallest man in the world, and they are radically different. And if you were a splitter, you would, if you found their bones, you'd say this is one species and this is maybe another genus. This is like, they're not even remotely the same, but they're the same. They're all both cousins related through Adam. And so, by the way, the dwarfing that we see in a lot of these, there's a gene that if we can, when we get around to sequencing these bones, we're going to look to see if they have Laren's syndrome, which is where the absence of growth hormone receptor is. That's very possibly part of what we're seeing with these very small skeletons. Bottom line is, Naledi is another great example of reductive evolution. And so every major claim that has been, like through the history of this field, the paleoanthropologists have been arguing fiercely over how to interpret each one of them. And for example, Neanderthal, in blue you see what the discoverers claimed, in red you see what other people in the field say and what we would say. So Naledi, they said it was pre-human. Now everybody knows it's fully human, there's no question. Erectus, they originally called it pre-human. Now more and more are saying this is clearly human but in decline. Naledi, some people have said it was pre-human. The founders originally said it was pre-human. Now it's clear that Naledi is fully human, and the dating methods now show that Naledi lived recently at the same time as anatomically modern people. Hobbit, they claimed pre-human. It's now clearly human. There's still some people who want to hold on to the idea it's a pre-human, but it's anatomically and brain cast is clearly human. Ceteba, they said pre-human. We would say it's a mixture of bones, and many others would agree. Habilis, originally claimed to be pre-human. Many in the field now say no, it's totally a mixture of bone fragments.
So there's a question?
Yes?
These ones where you say human in decline, these are not creationist sayings.
No, this is my table, and but a lot of them, so basically, within the paleoanthropology community, they're acknowledging they see that these were in decline, but they would still say our dating methods show it was. So it would be mixed, how they would describe it. But it's clear, from our point of view, it's clear that these populations are in decline. They were clearly human, but the reason they're so strange looking is because of this severely accelerated genetic decline. Just to get a sense of where these bones would be placed in a biblical context, here we have population size and here we have time. So the evolutionists would say there was a population of about 10,000 through deep time as apes evolved into man. Then there was so the red is evolution. Then there was some sort of bottleneck that happened, kind of related to the out of Africa thing. They all agree there was a bottleneck. We would say, yeah, the bottleneck is called Noah's flood, where only 6 people survived. So for the biblical view, we start with Adam and Eve, they grow into a big population, there's a flood. Either way, you have this decline to a small population. And then recovery happens fairly rapidly. This is where the different, and both sides would agree on this splitting, and that is that once the rebound started, the different people groups started to diverge. So we would have this be the Tower of Babel when the people groups disperse. And so we would say these supposed pre-humans are actually small splinter groups that were isolated and undergoing reductive evolution. Those populations went extinct, and so they're mistaken as pre-humans. So that gives you kind of a view of how a biblical Christian might look at that. Concluding remarks is that the hominin fossil record speaks more clearly about human degeneration than about human evolution. In our opinion, the most credible scientific model of human origin aligns remarkably well with the Bible. And so, more and more, I feel we're seeing that good science affirms Scripture. And so, I'm really excited about that. I think it's God's grace that we are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made. But we are fallen people in a fallen world. Those hominin skeletons that were so distorted, they had a soul. And they're our brethren. We're broken, but we can be redeemed, and we're heaven bound. Hallelujah. Amen. Any questions? Yes.
Are you familiar with the Littlefoot fossil and the Sterkfontein caves in South Africa?
I've heard of it. I can't picture it.
I've been there. I've seen it. And the significance of it is that it's a Australopithecine with a complete foot, and it does have a opposable toe. So in my mind, it clearly indicates that this is an ape.
Yeah, so basically, human foot is very unique. There's no other creature that has a foot like we do, and it's specifically designed for upright walking. So a typical ape foot is very hand-like, and the thumb is way out here, so that an ape can hold a banana with its foot, and then peel it with its hand. So the feet are like hands. And so ape feet are very easy to recognize, and this is called the halix, but the whole hand is designed for grasping. Not the whole hand, the whole foot is designed for grasping, as if it was the third and fourth hand. And so there shouldn't be any confusion about. There are people who want to give Lucy human feet, and it's based upon footprints that are in a different part of Africa. So when you see ape-like feet, they're really easy to recognize, and human feet are really easy to recognize. If you see something but if you have mixed bones, you can have an Australopith skull and a human foot, and they're in the same cave or the same. And so that's we talked about selective use of dating methods. There's also selective choice of which bones to take home. Bones that are clearly ape or clearly human don't interest them. They're always looking for the blend. And so that's why that's what's happening. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah, could you just dwell a little bit about radiometric dating in general? I mean, are you saying that you don't believe hardly any of it? I mean, you showed us that slide that showed how all these mistakes were made. But are you generally suspicious or?
I'm generally
radiometric
very
dating?
suspicious of radiometric dating. And the one thing that you should be aware of is carbon-14. Because even though it can be used to show that carbon-14 is a better measure of youngness than oldness. So carbon-14 has a short half-life, and there's any sample that has any detectable carbon-14 must be less than 100,000 years old, more typically less than 50,000 years old. Anything with detectable carbon-14 would be, from an evolutionary view, very, very young. And the interesting thing is that carbon-14 is found throughout the geological column. You can find diamonds which are often 1 billion years old. And in the matrix of that diamond, they can find carbon-14 that couldn't possibly be due to contamination. And all coal deposits show carbon-14, all natural gas, all petroleum, all graphite deposits, all limestone, they all show detectable carbon-14. Most dinosaur bones date around 25 to 30,000 years old using carbon-14. And all these fossils date young. And so pretty soon they learn not to use carbon-14 because it's, so carbon-14 would argue that all these bones are young. And
So it's all just a big it's bad science. Is that?
It's there's a deep presupposition where they're convinced with all their heart and soul that evolution is true.
Right.
And they want to believe that.
Right.
And so all the data that supports that they publish, and the data that doesn't,
Right.
they go, it must be wrong.
Right.
It's clearly wrong,
Right.
so we're not going to publish it.
Right.
And so there is an incredible
Bias.
Yeah, there's something going on here more than just objective science, and we're subjected to it too. We also tend to see the data that's consistent with our worldview. So it's a human foible. It's universal, but the paleoanthropologists need the dates. The dates justify all their conclusions, and so they are selective in the use of their dating methods. Yeah. Yes?
So I had a thought when you presented the man from Russia who was a boxer and also a member of parliament. But you made a comment that he looked like maybe he had some Neanderthal blood. So my question is, do you think it's possible that some of these groups like Neanderthal or maybe even other groups were not just human populations in decline, but just maybe there were also some healthy human populations that were fully human that are now extinct?
Right. So Neanderthal is a special case. Neanderthal was very artistic, really smart. They could take down mammoths hunting. They had technology for producing really powerful glue, very complex chemistry to get super glue for their weapons. They used cosmetics. They could ceremonial bury their dead. So they're clearly human, and actually their brain volume is equal to ours. But they do say they were inbred, and so they had they had a more genetic load than we have. They clearly interbred. They say most Europeans carried some Neanderthal blood, maybe up to 5% of the genome. So that's a case of where they didn't go very far into decline, and then when they interbred with outside people, they would be anatomically They would be largely normal.
So you're saying there's a population that separated for a while and then came back and interbred with a wider
Right.
population?
Right. Basically, they came out of Babel, colonized Europe and parts of Asia, and then the rest of humanity caught up with them and intermated and gave us the European population.
And we can see evidence for all that, even from modern genetic evidence and allele frequencies and all those things.
Right, there's a lot of support for that, and the other side wouldn't argue that. So both sides now, both the evolutionists and creationists, have almost exactly the same view of Neanderthal. But Homo erectus, as I showed you, they're just tiny, often very tiny, reduced brain volume, and lots of aberrants. So those populations were much further down and probably never recovered. They probably went extinct. Yes?
Can you expand on the issue of inbreeding? I understand after the ball that you had 6 individuals who go before then have Adam and Eve, and Eve came from Adam.
Right.
How did that inbreeding did not develop conditions?
So that's a good question. So here's an interesting thing to consider. We all carry thousands of mutations. How many mutations in Adam and Eve? When they were created, they had none. So inbreeding, so in the Bible, God forbids inbreeding at the time of Moses. So for 1,000, almost 2,000 years, the inbreeding wasn't severe enough, in effect, to require that. And he wanted godly people to marry godly spouses, to marry. And so he did want lineages that were godly. So he allowed closer intermarriage for Abraham, for example, and others. But Adam and Eve would have had no problem because they would have started out with no mutations. So in that case, inbreeding, close intermarriage for those early generations would have neither genetic consequences nor would it be forbidden by God. A lot of the law that Moses gave had to do with how to deal with our fallen state. And in Eden, things started out perfect.
And Cain's wife.
And Cain's wife would have been one of his cousins, probably. So, you all ready for lunch? Okay. Thanks.